From Recorded Future News, this is Click Here's Mic Drop. About a month before the 2024 elections, I was on stage with the relatively new director of cybersecurity over at the National Security Agency, David Luber. He's a bit of a fixture in cybersecurity circles. He was deputy at the Cybersecurity Directorate before he took that top job. He was executive director at Cyber Command. He worked cyber and space issues in Colorado. And we interviewed him at Recorded Future's Predict conference in D.C. Recorded Future News is an editorially independent arm of Recorded Future. And we wanted the director to talk to us about this relatively simple thing. So what are the threats that kind of keep you up at night? Stay with us.
ChatGPT, AI machines,
satellite, engine ignition,
click here,
and liftoff.
A few months before the Russian invasion in 2022, a contingent of cyber operators from U.S. Cyber Command quietly flew to Ukraine on a secret mission. They came to help Ukraine find any malware Russia might have dropped on their critical networks ahead of the war. U.S. Cyber Command does these kinds of missions all over the world all the time. They're called hunt-forward operations.
It's an actual authority that Cyber Command has when requested by a foreign partner and approved through the Department of Defense.
This is David Luber, the director of the Cybersecurity Directorate at NSA.
One can then go and support a country in their cybersecurity.
And they're sitting side by side with Ukrainian operators looking for bad things.
It is a side-by-side type operation, but where NSA plays a role in those hunt-forward operations is sharing insights with the team on the adversaries they're likely to encounter when they go out on a hunt-forward operation. So we partner with the hunt-forward teams to ensure that they have the best insights possible from intelligence, the best insights possible, even from the experts that we have at the National Security Agency, on mitigation guidance and capabilities to identify advanced persistent threats and cyber activity once they get into an area and as they're operating. So a really important partnership.
So Cyber Command operators wade into the networks with their foreign partners, and NSA offers additional intelligence so they can get more insights from what they find. And the general sense at the time was that Russia was going to use the war in Ukraine to show the world how cyber attacks would change what we thought we knew about modern warfare. But that didn't happen.
If you go back to the start of the Ukraine conflict and what we saw from Russia, I think there was a big expectation there was going to be a large-scale cyber attack against Ukrainian systems. There was no real big bang.
No big bang. Maybe because Russia had indeed planted malware it planned to use when the invasion started, but the hunt-forward teams had found a lot of it and quietly removed it. Cyber Command declined to say exactly how many pieces of malware they had removed from Ukraine's critical networks during that operation, but we did get a hint from the Ukrainians when we went to Ukraine this time last year. The cybersecurity chief of the SBU, that's the nation's main security agency, was a guy named Ilya Vituk. His cyber operators were the ones sitting alongside the American teams, and he told us they discovered more than 90 different pieces of malware. And while he wouldn't be specific about where exactly they'd found it, he did say Russian intelligence, their GRU, had planted it in networks that could control things like water and electricity and communications.
By the way, GRU were also responsible for these attacks. They thought that our infrastructure, our digital infrastructure, will be on its knees. But their expectations were far beyond comparing to what actually happened.
One of the things that actually happened outside those critical networks, but rocked Ukraine all the same, was a Russian hack into the Ka-sat satellite on the eve of the war. KA-SAT, which is owned by the U.S. company Viasat, beams high-speed internet to a wide swath of Europe. And in the early hours of February 24th, KA-SAT modems and terminals started to go down, knocking thousands of people, not just Ukrainians, offline. At first, security officials assumed it was a jammed signal. They eventually discovered that Russian hackers had broken into the company's modems and dropped wiper malware on them. Viasat ended up working closely with the NSA, not just to figure out how Russian hackers got in, but also to share what they knew, so it wouldn't happen anywhere else. Since then, Luber said Russian hackers appear to have changed tactics.
What I think has shifted and changed is now the Russians shifting back to more espionage. How can I conduct espionage against Ukrainian systems so that I can have an advantage on the battlefield? So a shift from a potential objective to do attack operations to what we see more of today is the opportunity for gleaning intelligence that would give the Russians advantage on the battlefield.
But it isn't just Russian hackers making a pivot. Luber said that he thinks one of the most impactful discoveries over the past year and a half has been China's offensive cyber operations against the U.S. The People's Liberation Army has a hacking unit that researchers have named Volt Typhoon. In the past, they were focused on espionage. But earlier this year, American officials, including FBI Director Christopher Wray, announced that Volt Typhoon had dropped malicious code into key networks inside the U.S. Wray said it looked like Volt Typhoon was planting little ticking time bombs in U.S. infrastructure so they could set them off if ever the U.S. and China found themselves in conflict. To find it, the U.S. launched a hunt operation. Just this time, it was much closer to home.
In Volt Typhoon, it's really the idea of pre-positioning for a future computer network attack at a time of their choosing. And that's very different than the espionage approach because they may only come into that network every 60 days, every 90 days to check access, and using credentials and legitimate credentials and command line tools and capabilities. It looks like a legitimate user doing non-legitimate activity.
Officials haven't said publicly how the Volt Typhoon cyber operations were discovered. What we do know is that the U.S. is continuing to hunt for malware deep inside its own networks, and they'll need lots of people, both in the public and private sector, to help them look.
In the end, it does take a number of different U.S. government partners, industry partners, and even foreign partners to ensure that we can identify, enumerate, and then work towards the ability to thwart ransomware activity across the globe. The most important thing that we have learned is sharing insights frequently with partners. Helps us ensure that adversaries like Russia and in other areas of the world, China, are not successful in their activities and operations.
It seems like what you're saying is the best solution is preemption.
Exactly.
Former NSA Director General Paul Nakasone had a name for this kind of work: persistent engagement. And at its core, it means relentlessly tracking adversaries.
And that means you're constantly going to look for changes in the way they conduct their tradecraft. You're going to look for adjustments in the way that you also identify that tradecraft. So whether it's a hunt forward operation or whether it's something that we're doing in the National Security Agency from an intelligence perspective, it's the ability to ensure that you can continue to identify those changes in the cyber landscape. So if you think about the malware that was used in the KA-SAT attack, that was Acid Rain. And that particular malware was shared broadly so that folks could understand how that malware could be used to actually impact a satellite modem. Of course, later, the Ukrainians found another version of that malware. I think it was March of this year. It was called Acid Pour. So an adjusted version of that malware, and they shared that broadly. So that's one of the ways that that we can work together as partners to ensure that when new versions of malware or new capabilities are developed by adversaries, that it's shared broadly.
Now, with an election around the corner and the prospect of adversarial meddling in both the Trump and Harris campaigns, I asked Director Luber whether what we've been seeing so far is more of the same or if the nature of meddling has actually evolved.
I won't be able to go into any specifics, but in general, outside of election security, you have to consider that adversaries are always changing their tradecraft. Adversaries are evolving their tactics and their techniques, even as we've been sitting here. New malware has been created, new detections have occurred. So it's an evolving landscape that requires constant change and constant vigilance when it comes to understanding how that environment's changing. That's where the real power of cybersecurity comes into play, because that's when you can start to scale the insights and scale the outcomes in a way that you can't do if you just try and go it alone.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. If you could give him a hand, please. And we hope to have you come back after the election and tell us all the things that you did. Thank you. This has been Click Here's Mic Drop. It was written and produced by Megan Dietrich, Jade Abdul Malik, Sean Powers, and me, Dina Temple-Rester. It was edited by Karen Duffin. We'll be back on Tuesday with an all-new episode of Click Here. Have a great weekend.